continuing the Big Give series. We're looking at the fact that there are needs around that we need to reach out to and encourage people with. But God has given us this great gift of Jesus at Christmas time, and we want to honor him and remember our Messiah, Jesus. A statement says, God doesn't just give, he provides. Think about that a little bit. God doesn't just give, God provides. Some of us would say, oh yes, that's true. We know that's true. That's part of how we live. It's part of how we walk. Others would stop and look at that phrase and go, I don't really know if that's true. God doesn't just give, God provides. In the sense that sometimes we're looking for those answers. We want them just to give those big things. We want to meet every need that we have. But realize that through the course of our life, he does provide. He does come in. He does meet those needs. Sometimes at Christmas time, our joys are amplified all over the place, and at the same time, our pain can be amplified in greater ways than other times. But that phrase, God doesn't just give, God provides, is true. So in the midst of those pains, we look at it, sometimes our finances are tight and it's hard, and you're thinking, how's God going to provide for all this? Or maybe you're lonely and it hurts, especially at Christmas time. You're grieving a great loss, and it seems to be even bigger at this time when everybody else is celebrating around you. You're lonely. The depression is coming on. The anger, the hatred that's in your heart. It's there, and you're thinking, where's God showing up in this? Because he didn't show up and fix everything like I wanted him to and prevent from all this pain coming on our life. But it's there. It may be hard. Some truths in the Bible. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says this in verse 45, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Saying life comes and life goes, and we see all kinds of bright and beautiful days, not only just for those who love Jesus, but for other people as well. We see those dreary, rainy days. It's hard and difficult, not only for the righteous, but for the unrighteous. We're in this life, which is broken and fallen. We see the presence of God around. We see the blessings of God. But realize that just because we're followers of Jesus doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect in our life. I'd like for it to be. 1 Timothy tells us this, chapter 6, verse 17. Your kids are studying this verse today as well. It says, command those who are rich in this present world. Stop right there. We just had our friend Marcus up here on the stage talking to us. Nicaragua is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. You go there, and many of you have been to places there in Haiti and different ones. You've seen extreme poverty. In this present world, who in this room? Are we the rich or are we the poor? The poorest of us are rich in this present world and where it's at. So when he says, command those who are rich in this present world, it's talking to everybody in this room. So listen to God's word. Command those who are rich, you in this present world, not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly does what? Provides us with everything for our enjoyment. So he said, don't be conceited, don't be arrogant, thinking, look how hard I've worked, look what I've done, look at my bank account, look what I've acquired, as in I'm such a better person than anybody else because of look what I've done. God says, don't do that. And when he says don't do it, there's usually a reason for it. He says, don't become arrogant and all this stuff because your wealth is so uncertain. It could be gone overnight. But what do? Put our hope in? It says put our hope in God because he richly provides us with everything that we need for our enjoyment. So God provides. You've got this hard-working job you've done, you produce so much. Well, who gave you the ability? Who gave you the mind to do those things? God did. Ultimately, it's all from God. God is the provider. And we need to remember always in life, no matter how hard we work, what we've done, not to become arrogant in our pride in what we've done, but to sit there and say, God, you're the one who provided. Even in the midst of our lack, of our need, of our disappointment and our pains, we look and we say, God, you're the one who's going to provide for this. And I need you to show up and do this. And he does. He comes along and he provides us with everything that we need, different from everything that we want. Now, if you are down in our children's ministry, you're trying to help your kids understand what you need versus what you want, we should be able to figure that out. Sometimes as adults, we have a hard time applying that lesson to ourselves. But God provides us everything that we need for our enjoyment. I want to share a couple of stories just help us understand how life is difficult and hard, but God still shows up and how God provides. Back in 168 BC, The Syrian Greeks came into the area that we know as Israel today. They came in, and after Alexander the Great, the whole Greek army, well, now the Syrian Greeks come in, and they come in, and Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he is not so favorable towards the Jewish people. He comes in a ruthless way. He comes into the city of Jerusalem, overtakes it, goes to the great temple, loots it, takes everything out of it. The next year in 167, he comes in, and he turns the temple to Jehovah God into a temple to Zeus. And he brings pigs in and slaughters them on the altar that was set aside for God. A great blasphemy. Is doing everything he could, not only to offend the people, but to offend their God. And then we see these men show up, this guy named Mattathias and his 4 sons, and they begin saying, this is wrong, and this is before God, this is wrong, and we've got to redeem what God has set up here and what these men have done to this. And so we see a small army of men, several hundred, get together, and the women, they come in, they're going to bring back their city, and they go against this great, huge army, and miraculously, somehow they overpower, and they free the city of Jerusalem, and they bring it back together, and they go to the temple, and they want to restore it to what it was. So they literally clean it out, but they want to restore it in the right way, the ceremony before God. And so one of the important things that they do is they light the menorah, the huge, huge menorah in the temple. And to light the temple, they've got to use a special oil, which is pure olive oil. They search the whole temple, and they find out one little vial of oil, but it's only enough to last a day. It's important for them to light the menorah because it symbolized the presence of God, the Shekinah glory of God returning to the temple. So they pray over this oil, they light their menorah, and as they light this menorah, God does something amazing because it takes 8 days for them to get the right oil for it to continue going. But they light the menorah, and these candles that were set upside, these oil lamps, so it was supposed to only last 1 day, but they lasted for 8 full days. So it burned for 8 days. Now they have more oil ready to go. And in this miracle, God provides for them and in his presence. And so today, that continues on. That celebration is there. We see it in the Bible, in the book of John. It's called the Festival of Lights, or the Festival of Dedication. We see Jesus celebrating this, and we see it in John chapter 10, verse 22. It says, then came the feast of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple area. And it tells a story about what happened to him during that feast of dedication. Today we call that Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is spelled a couple different ways. One's with an H, the other one's with a CH, because it's the way the Hebrew H is pronounced, and I can't do it, but it's something like that, all right? So it's clear in your throat. It's Hanukkah. So it's spelled a couple different ways. But Hanukkah today, they would have the Hanukkah menorah, or it's called the Hanukkah, that comes together. It's different from a regular menorah. A regular menorah has 7 candles on it. When it comes to Hanukkah menorah, there's 9 candles, because it symbolizes the 8 days. The middle candle, which is always set up a little bit higher and different, is the shamash, or it's the servant candle. So the servant candle is lit first, and then the others, and we know that that servant candle represents the Messiah, because Jesus came as a servant for his people. So he comes and he provides for the others. So if you were celebrating Hanukkah, and on Wednesday night we got together, so many of you came together, and Rabbis Harlan and Joyce taught us about Hanukkah. We did a little Hanukkah celebration, and we did this. So we took the shamash candle and we lit the first one. So on the first day of Hanukkah, which began this past week, you light 1 candle. The next night you would light 2 candles, and you light them and you let them burn throughout the day till they burn out. Then the next day you would light 3 candles and so forth. So today we should have 8 candles that are going, because it's not quite finished. And then tomorrow we would light the final candle for Hanukkah. It's a great celebration. It's this time when we sit back and we remember. We remember not only the rededication of the temple, but you remember that God provides. Remember that God shows up and that God is present. So one of the statements of Hanukkah is it's a time to remember that there is no force that can defeat us. I love that phrase. There's no force that can defeat us and knock us down. Now that statement was come up long before the Star Wars series came about, all right? So it's not that force we're talking about. But the idea, there's so many things going against us, so many things knocking us down. But Hanukkah is that time we come together, and Jesus, remember this festival, is just stop and say, no matter who's against us, no matter what kind of things you're opposed in you, knocking you down, you feel like you're being set back, to light those candles, remember, no, God is still present, and God is still there, and his glory is still showing up in my life. It's still around us. So that statement, God doesn't just give, God provides. Hanukkah is a remembrance of that. Now, one of the fun things about Hanukkah, if you celebrate it, is they celebrate it for 8 days and you get a gift for every day. So you give 8 gifts over that time. It's fun. Some of you are Jewish background and you've asked the question, should I celebrate Hanukkah or Christmas? I'd say do both. I mean, especially, 8 gifts and Christmas time, you get more gifts. That's even more fun, right? But there's nothing wrong with it. If you have friends who are Jewish, it is wonderful to say Happy Hanukkah to them. Because you're saying, we remember how God provides. And it's encouragement saying, no matter what's against you, God is present. God's going to be there. It's a great phrase when you understand what it is. Now, a lot of Jews don't understand the meaning of Hanukkah the same as a lot of Christians don't understand the true meaning of Christmas. But to express that, to reach out, realize Jesus celebrated Hanukkah, and we can if you want to, but realizing God provides. Amen? Another story, of course, we know as the Christmas story, is in Luke chapter 2, is a story about the angel showing up to Mary, telling her she's going to give birth to a child, and this child is going to be the Messiah. Goes to Joseph, tells Joseph in a dream she's going to give birth to a child, and it's going to be the baby, is going to name him Jesus. And sure enough, they travel from Nazareth all the way to Bethlehem. They get there, the baby is born, and there's a great celebration in some ways. Who shows up? Just a bunch of poor, stinky shepherds, right? Angels tell them, they come in, and the King of all kings, the King of the universe, the Messiah from heaven comes. And who is there but this poverty-stricken couple and these poor shepherds come in. And they celebrate this. The birth of our Messiah has come for us. And then we see some other men showing up. In Matthew chapter 2, we read about them. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. So the question of who are these Magi? Who are these men? And we used to sing a song, We Three Kings of Orient Are. You know that song? So we always think there's 3 and they're kings. They always wore robes, and there's all different kinds of variations of that song. When I was little, we did the We Three Kings of Orient Are, smoking on a rubber cigar. I don't know what that was. It exploded, and you do those things. But for some reason, that just sticks in our head, and we think of the Magi. We think there's 3 of them, and they were kings, and that the Bible doesn't say that. We don't know how many there were. We know there were 3 gifts. In fact, were there 3 gifts, or there were 3 categories of gifts? You know, it says they brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. Was it just like a gold bar or one gold thing? Or was it gifts of gold? Was it gifts of incense and gifts of myrrh? We don't know. But these men traveled a long ways. It says they came from the east. They came from a long distance. And the Magi, you look up that word Magi, who are these people? And we have to go all the way back to the Old Testament, to the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, we see that many of the Jews were carried off into captivity, off into what we know as Iraq now. They're there. One of those men was named Daniel. He came in before King Nebuchadnezzar was able to interpret the dream with the power of God, gave God all the glory for it. And so Nebuchadnezzar set him up as being over the top of, guess what? A group of men called Magi. So Daniel was there, and he instructed them for many years. No doubt they heard his teaching about the 70 weeks. They heard his teaching about prophecy. They knew his teaching. If you just follow that teaching on the 70 weeks, it pinpointed the exact time when the Messiah was going to be born. So hundreds of years later, Daniel says it. They follow this teaching, no doubt, throughout the generations. They knew the time period that the Messiah was going to be born. And so these men who maybe perhaps are pagans, but they follow this teaching, these Magi are very intelligent. They're schooled. They've been trained in history and in science and philosophy, astronomy, astrology. Back then, astrology was a way of trying to study the heavens to see who God was. These men were very schooled in so many ways. No doubt they kept those teachings of Daniel about this coming Messiah. And when the time was come, there was a star. We don't know what the star looked like. There's all kinds of teachings on what this star was. But they saw his star with the teachings that they already knew. They knew the time was come. And so they traveled 1,000 miles to get to this place. Where they go to? They go to Jerusalem. That's where all the Jewish is. It was the center of Judaism at that time. I would say it's the capital of the city, the country, but that sounds like we're being political today, right? But it was the center of it. So if they're going to look for this new king of the Jews, they would go to this place, the center of it all. They come there. When they come into town, it's not just 3 men who look a lot of these nativity sets. They're 3 men with cone heads riding on 3 camels, right? But this wasn't it. These guys are advisors to the king. These men are very significant where they were at. If these men would have been traveling on behalf of the king of Babylon, and they're traveling with these incredibly expensive gifts, it would have been a whole entourage. There would have been a military escort with these men as they traveled 1,000 miles. They'd have come, some would speculate up to 300 people would have been part of this entourage coming, but it's a huge thing. So as they show up in the city of Jerusalem, it would have got everybody's attention. Certainly, it got King Herod's attention. He doesn't know what they're talking about. He asks his people, and they study. They get out, and they go, oh, yeah, we know that the Messiah was going to be born. He's going to be born in Bethlehem. And so we see this going on with the story. Verse number 7 of Matthew 2. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I may too go and worship him. This is a lying through his teeth right here. He's not about to go worship him. He feels the threat. He says, you go find this child. It's interesting, these scribes, these religious men, knew about the Messiah, but they weren't searching for him. They weren't even aware that he'd been born. Verse 9, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So somehow this star that had first began their journey, perhaps months, maybe a year ahead of time, this long time before, had disappeared in some sense because it had been there. And now it says when they left Jerusalem, it reappeared again. I like to think of this star kind of like the pillar of fire that led the children of Israel in the desert after they left Egypt, the Shekinah glory of God. So as they left Jerusalem, the star appeared again and took them to the exact spot where the baby was. They followed him. It was only 5 or 6 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And then verse 11, it says, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. So they go to a house. It wasn't the stable where Jesus was born before, but now it was a house. We don't know how long it was, what time transpired between the two, but some time had passed. The Eastern Orthodox Church looks at it and says it was 12 days after Jesus was born that it took to get there. So they traveled 1,000 miles in 12 days, walking in camel. That's a fast trip. It says they got there. So they celebrate 12 days of Christmas from December 25th to January 6th. So according to Eastern Orthodox, you celebrate 12 days of Christmas, or you give the 12 gifts of Christmas. We have this song about the 12 gifts of Christmas, right? So I think it'd be pretty fun to celebrate Hanukkah, Christmas, and the 12 days of Christmas. Just think of all the presents you get there, right? That'd be the way to do it. So you go to Eastern Orthodox areas, it's January 6th is when they celebrate Christmas because they recognize Jesus was born, but they recognize when the wise men gave gifts, that's the custom of giving gifts where it began. And they honor and they celebrate that part of it. Those are all good customs that come together. But it's interesting how we can celebrate them and forget the true meaning of what it's all about. Last year when Nick Ballard shared on this subject, he talked about, and we set up our nativity sets, we have them all there. We have Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the angel and so forth. If you're bringing the wise men into it, they should be in the other room because they weren't there the night Jesus was born, kind of coming down the hallway or something. Now in our fireplace, they all sit together because I like a complete picture, but they weren't there that night. Got the picture? It says they showed up to the house. We don't know when it was. It could have been months later. It could have been a year later or longer. We do know that later they did not go back to Herod because the angel told them in a dream, don't go back. We know that Joseph and Mary were instructed to leave and get out of the area, and Herod comes in with this horrific thing of hatred. He wants to kill the Messiah so bad, it says he instructs the men to kill all the baby boys age 2 and under. Now, it could have been 2 years since the baby was born. Knowing Herod and the extreme wickedness as he was, he probably wanted to have good measure, so I don't think it had been that long, maybe a year, and he said, just to make sure we get him, he covered a much broader period. It was a horrible thing that happened. These men traveled to bring the gifts. Notice when they came into this great King Herod that everybody feared, this crazy man, that they did not bow before him, they did not give gifts to the king, but they took their gifts and they bowed before this poor couple and their small baby, and they gave their incredibly wealthy gifts to a baby that other people would have passed by. and ignored. These wise men who'd studied from afar knew about the Messiah coming. And here's the religious scribes of Jerusalem had no clue the Messiah was right in their midst. Sometimes as religious people, we get so caught up with all the stuff that everything going on, we miss the truth of God and Jesus and what he's doing in our lives and how he's providing. It's easy for us to get caught up in all the stuff of this world and forget to search out Jesus in our own lives and what he's providing for each one of us. We need to give, and we do give to what we worship. Sometimes the things that we worship aren't the things that we should worship. We give to those things that we worship. The things that you value most, you have the resources, you have the time, you've got the finances, you put everything into those, but the problem is we often worship the wrong things. We go the wrong direction. We're putting all of our time, all of our finances, all of our energy into the things of this world which will come and they'll go. Sometimes we're out there trying to impress our King Herods, the people that we want their attention so bad. We're trying to impress the people around us and we're forgetting to go towards Jesus, our Messiah himself, and recognize who he is. Recognize his providing in our life. Those gifts, the gold, the incense, and the myrrh, there's all kinds of teaching on that. The gold was there to demonstrate the royalty in his life. The incense, because he was going to be the ultimate high priest. The myrrh, because it was a symbol of his coming death. I don't think the wise men knew the significance of those, but they gave these incredible gifts. And right after they gave those gifts, his family had to flee the area, and they went to Egypt, and they lived. How in the world did they pay for that trip and living in Egypt? Because these gifts that were given to them. God provided for them. God reached out to them in the midst of time when they needed it the most. He provided what they needed. Now, if we're with our kids or you're in a small group, we would just take some time and would say, let's just stop and think, how has God provided for you? You just pause and think. It's not what I wanted. I wanted this. I want this. I wish I was this place of life now. But just think, what has he provided for you? He's given you grace. He's given you love. He gave you breath today. For some, he's given some relationships, some friends, some family around. You could say it's our life group that gives me the support I need to go on through life that's going to be there. He's given me the encouragement, the support, the value in your life. If you've been studying with us, we know that God loves you and God gives value to you. He's designed a family for you to be a part of, even if you don't have a physical family that's attractive there, but God's given you a spiritual family through the church. There's things that God provides for you, and we just stop and say, look how God has, in the midst of all the pain of life, in the midst of my grief, the heartache, God has shown up, and he does provide. He gives the affirmation. We already read 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. Listen to verse 18. It says, command them, those who are rich, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. It says, command those who have all this stuff, these resources, command those who I've provided for them to do good deeds. This week, your word, the command from God, do some good deeds this week. Look around you. See some people who need encouragement. See some people who need that love and do good deeds. Well, how does God provide for us? He gives us grace. There's people in your life who need grace demonstrated. Your family needs God's grace demonstrated. Your coworkers need to be affirmed. They need to have value more than what they're producing at your work. Can you give them what God's provided for you? It says be willing and generous to share. It means being gracious. Not just, oh, I don't know, do they deserve this? No, that's not what grace is all about. Be generous, be kind, reach out. It doesn't mean the most lavish gifts in the world, but ones that give value and encouragement to others. As a body of believers, we should celebrate Christmas differently than the rest of the world. And there should be a different heart as you approach this week. Sure, you're stressed out, you're overwhelmed, finances are tight. It's not a matter of those gifts that you give, the value of them, but it's how you give. The notes that you may write this week, the encouragement that's there. How do you give love and grace and value to the lives of others? One of the phrases your kid's going to hear is, we need to give like you're giving to God. We give to God a demonstration of how we honor him. We give to God like those wise men that came. They went out of their way to worship God. Again, they didn't worship Herod, they worshiped Jesus. Some of us have to look at our priorities and see what are the things we're worshiping in this world and holding up a value in front of God. We worship him. It's part of coming together, not only as a body of believers, but individually with your life. They gave these incredible gifts. It's a way of showing their love for God and reaching out to him. And we need to give God the very first that we have. That means giving our tithes and giving our offerings. But more than that, it's a demonstration of heart. Being generous at this time of the year. And again, it's not buying all this stuff on your credit card and putting yourself in bankruptcy, but reaching out and saying, how do I give God's love? How do I give value to people around me? And give to your family and your friends, the people who need love, like you're giving to God with a sense of grace and reaching out and loving. How do you encourage? How do you lift up? How do you give in a way that says God provides? Maybe the way God can provide some of the people around you is through you. You're going to be that generous gift to them. Father, thank you for the gift of Christmas. Thank you for the gift that you've given in our lives and our hearts. And thank you for the story of Hanukkah, how you provide, and what a beautiful picture of the Hanukkah and what it demonstrates that you provide in the midst of all the pain against us. Father, we thank you for these wise men who truly were wise in seeking what was most important. Father, I pray that as individuals, as families, as a body of believers, that you would help each one of us. Some in this room are going through great difficulty right now. And Father, I pray that you would show your provision for them, that you would meet needs. Father, help each one of us to have an attitude and a heart of generosity and love. Father, help us as we maneuver through this week and all the expectations. And I pray that you help each person this week to be a demonstration of your grace and your love to others. In your name I pray.